Okay, so what we had looked at on Friday was some of the reasons why we shouldn't villainize or demonize interest groups. So rather than do a long warm up, let's just look at a couple. What's hopefully the one that is the most obvious that I tried to drill into your head? Why we shouldn't villainize or demonize interest groups? What do they give us? Yeah, they give us expertise. We need the groups that have specialized and focused on a narrow issue, because with that specialization becomes an expertise. Now, hopefully what I do is counterbalance it against the information from other interest groups, but they certainly give us expertise. Because they focus on a single issue and they do so intensely, can you think of another benefit? If we didn't have this, and I'll give you a hint, big kind of, softball over the plate here. If they didn't give us this outlet, to kind of narrowly focus on an interest, we assume the parties might not focus on it. Would burn the place down, right? They're a vehicle for stability. If I don't have an outlet, I burn things, right? So they're a vehicle for stability. And then a final one, we hope to occasionally achieve this within a democratic society, although our Congress never looks capable of it. They're going to focus on a single issue, and occasionally they're going to achieve what? Go ahead. Yeah, compromise and change, right? They're going to find some way to get, progress made, okay? So they are a source of expertise. They're a source of stability in many ways. And we could talk about stability in the form of, A, you having an outlet, but B, also the pluralist theory from Federalist what? Always look for that excuse. It's the one Federalist you got to know. 10, right? Federalist 10. Out of all the others, that's, then there's 47, and you guys are going to obviously have to review the Federalist Papers and the numbers again. But from Federalist 10, it suggests that those competing interest groups in a large republic cancel each other out. So we've got it as a source of stability, both in terms of an outlet and a canceling force, and then this idea of, an agent for change as well. That having been said, they do get rather demonized. And what we're going to enter into on a Monday when you all look rather sluggish, and I think I got 2 hours of sleep last night. I had a night of insomnia. So this ought to be good, is looking at reform issues that include money and politics. We did a little bit of it when we looked at the executive branch and the Electoral College. We're going to do it again here in much more detail, and we'll do it one more time in campaigns and elections. And what that ought to signal is how complex it is. Makes federalism look like a walk in the park and all the different cakes. Okay, Kelly's cringing over there. She hates the cakes. All right. So our reform issues, to start with, like we talked about, when you have all these interest groups pushing for their narrow, selfish interest, they potentially contribute to the gridlock that characterizes Washington, D.C. We've already got parties that are not looking for room to compromise. You throw in some zealous interest groups, and you have, a more intense form of gridlock. In addition, we talked about pluralism, and the idea is hopefully these interest groups counterbalance and cancel each other out in the sense that one group doesn't dominate. An alternate theory is hyper-pluralism, where there are so many interest groups and they are so powerful that they essentially bring government to kind of a standstill. They weaken it. And then I told you this was, for some reason, political scientists absolutely love this theory, and it shows up on the AP test like every year. So Nick saved you guys on Friday. Who's going to answer it today? What is the iron triangle? How many sides to a triangle? Good. And then who are the three sides?
Bureaucracy, legislators, and
Good. And they're working hand in hand. It's a symbiotic relationship for them. Each benefits from the other. But what that symbiotic relationship does is kind of, blind them to the greater good. The legislators need, among other things, information and expertise, but the support of interest groups, might be financial as well. Hold on, Olivia. So I got to fix my screen here. So I've got Congress, I've got interest groups, and then I've got the bureaucracy. All right? So Congress needs the information and the expertise. And they might need the financial support and the electoral support that interest groups bring them, as well as, bringing home the benefits to their district through earmarks, riders, pork barrel politics, however you want to kind of call it. So, when they deliver programs and policies and, hopefully that, involves jobs and economic benefits, it's a win for them. The interest groups certainly want access and they want policy change, right? And then what does the bureaucracy want? The bureaucracy wants to continue to kind of grow and expand because that's job security. So all are working to kind of, do things together regardless of the larger interest. And it's an iron triangle. You can't break it. They love that question. These are kind of the generic problems. But what the larger problem is that involves a lot of unraveling is looking at the role of money in politics and efforts to reform and looking at how effective it is. Again, what I suggested is on one level, money gets you access. If you're a big-time campaign contributor, ideally that money gets you access. Does it get you the vote? That's not as clear. It's hard to draw kind of a causal relationship to it, unless you had audio tape where someone says, I'm going to give you this, you're going to vote this way, or else. They got to really kind of put it up as a bribe as opposed to, look, we're giving you money because this is what we would expect from you policy-wise. That part is reasonable, At any rate, here's where you guys are hopefully familiar with things. In the 70s, again, there was this whole political disenchantment following Watergate. And there are efforts to, rein in government. You can look at the War Powers Act. We can certainly look at, the impeachment proceedings against Nixon. And then what we can also look at is, in 1974, the Federal Campaign Finance Act and the restrictions it introduced. I got to backtrack, too. Prior to this, the only other major reform was this Federal Regulation of Lobbying Act, which just simply, and if in doubt, and you don't know what, bless you, a financial reform is about, the rule of thumb is just to talk about it making money transparent. That's your go-to, right? Because if I make money transparent, if I let the public see the money trail, that hopefully is a way of achieving reform. So that's going to be a kind of a common theme throughout all these different iterations of, acts and court cases and so on and so forth, all right? Making the money transparent. And that's what they tried to do in 46 with this Federal Regulation of Lobbying Act. What they said is any congressional lobbyist has to file these quarterly financial reports. You have to show us where the money went. And we can audit it to make sure that, you're reporting things accurately. Well, what they ended up doing, and once you've kind of seen the way that they try to make things transparent, the next thing you want to do is look for a loophole, because that's invariably what they'll find. They'll find some sort of loophole. Money is like water. It will eventually find the path of least resistance, and it will wear things down, and it will find an outlet. What they simply did is say, okay, lobbyists have to file quarterly reports. Well, I'm not a lobbyist. I'm an advisor. They changed their title as a way of getting around a need to file a report and to be, continue to give money that wasn't regulated and wasn't, monitored. Okay? So this is the next time that we try to fix things. And again, it comes in the wave of Watergate and, our disenchantment with government following the Nixon administration. These four things hopefully are familiar. The first thing that we're going to try to do is to put limits on contributions. Wealthy individuals had a disproportionate ability to affect elections because they had a disproportionate amount of wealth. They had more wealth than anybody. And the idea was, let's reduce, and I love the imagery, let's reduce the role of fat cats. That spoiled tabby cat that you have in your house that just eats and, tears up the furniture and then looks at you disdainfully, right? They're using that imagery deliberately, this idea of kind of fat cats. These fat cats, have more influence than the common person, and it's not democratic, right? So let's put a ceiling on what everybody can give. And then, as people are giving money, let's make sure that that money that is being given is public, right? Again, that number one rule, make sure that things are transparent. So let's make sure that money is transparent. And what was kind of groundbreaking and innovative was the idea of let's see if we can come up with a mode to bypass the role of kind of wealthy individuals in the first place. Let's come up with a public financing system. The system again works where if you collect money in small increments from a broad spectrum of people, and we'll go over the number. I don't think necessarily you'd have to remember the math to it, but what you just want to remember is the rule of thumb, that you want to show that you're viable and that you have widespread support by gaining a lot of little contributions all across the states. And if you do so, then the federal government will match you dollar for dollar, okay, based on what they've got in the coffers. So this is just for presidential elections, and again, it has a ceiling because it's based on what they have available. Do you guys remember where I said the money comes from? When you file income tax, there's this portion of it. You remember?
It says, like, do you want to donate any money to...
Yeah. Do you remember the amount? Everybody file and actually kind of look at the forms. You might have had your parents do it. Or it's a $3 checkoff box. So do you want to contribute $3 to the Federal Elections Campaign Fund to make them publicly funded, right? And what it says specifically is it will not reduce the amount you get back. If you were supposed to get back $2,000, you get back $2,000. What it does is it adjusts how they kind of allocate money. So there's a portion of your tax dollars that get directed to this fund or not. What you get back remains the same. Again, I got to come up with it. It's somewhere buried in the lecture. I think it's something like 40%, maybe even less. Check that box off because they're like, I'm not giving $3. They don't realize that it's not like $3 out of pocket. I just don't want to give $3, right? And again, it has the potential to make elections publicly funded and to reduce the role of wealthy individuals. That having been said, we haven't relied on this system for a long time. It was John McCain was the last candidate, I think, that took the matching funds. Because since then, you've had, like, Obama's been able to raise an amazing amount independently. Mitt Romney was able to raise an amazing amount independently. People have been able to raise funds well above the ceiling set by the matching funds. So unless they figure out how to make the matching funds mandatory, in other words, look, you're only going to have X amount to spend on elections, and that's it. You have to kind of take this money, and you're going to have a ceiling. People are going to continue to go outside of it because the more money you spend, the more exposure you get, the more likely it is you're going to win. At any rate, these are the three restrictions that they set up. I failed to mention that we set up the federal elections, the FEC, the Federal Elections Commissions, as a watchdog agency to monitor this and make sure that everything is being done the right way. Okay, so that's the act in general. How does it relate to interest groups? Well, if interest groups want to spend money now, there's ceilings and there's regulations for it. It has to be money that is monitored. So what it forces them to do is to form PACs. Okay, that's part of your basic terminology. You're going to have to know that term cold. A PAC is a political action committee. Any entity that wants to have influence in the political process has to form this kind of independent arm, and the sole job is to do the political spending and to make sure that it can be monitored and that it's transparent, right? So if the AFL-CIO wants to spend in elections, they have to form a PAC. If General Electric wants to spend in elections, they have to form a PAC. Any interest group, the AMA wants to, influence elections, they have to form a PAC. They have to form these federally mandated, officially registered fundraising committees that represent them in the political process. And so what you see is this proliferation, obviously, after the act of PACs. Let's go into this just to... I don't expect you to remember the numbers, but it's sometimes helpful to see the grid that they adjust it for inflation, and that's in part why maybe it's not beneficial to remember the numbers. But there's ceilings individuals have to give to candidates, to the party. You can give, we'll talk about it. There's money that you give to the party, and it goes for party building activities. And I can give it to the national or the states. And then what they've done is they've kind of gone away with a limit in terms of the combined amount that you can give. So I can give to 2,600 to as many different candidates as I want. And then down here are the limits for PACs. Okay, so it may be helpful to see it as a grid, but this is what we tried to establish. But what we're going to come up with next is the loopholes. Not by going to China. I should hide this. What's the court case that's going to blow this wide open? Again, Federalist 10 should wake you up in a cold panic. Marbury versus Madison and Buckley versus Vallejo. Buckley versus Vallejo should be one that you know cold. Again, what does it say about the independent expenditure of money? That it's a form of what? Free speech, right? Notice I stressed independent. Okay? So with Buckley versus Vallejo, I'm going to, begin to say, look, if you're spending money independently, that's a form of political expression, and you can't limit that. And as a result, I get two loopholes. Once you've figured out, this is how they try to make it transparent, invariably, if there's a question on this, it's going to be then about the loopholes. And the loopholes, if it's just Buckley versus Vallejo, and cross your fingers that it is the use of independent expenditures on issue ads and soft money. Okay? So PACs began to form, and they began to independently spend on issue ads. And then there's this thing called soft money. Now, terminology gets a little tricky, but I think once you see it, it's kind of obvious. What Buckley versus Vallejo, what the court did in Buckley versus Vallejo is they made a distinction between two types of ads. One set of ads are considered express advocacy. The others are called issue advocacy. In express advocacy, you are expressly advocating for a candidate. You are doing things that overtly show your support for that candidate. And they literally came up with a list of dirty words. That if these words are in your ad, it means it's an express ad. It means you have ceilings. You can't, you have to subscribe to the limits set up by the Campaign Finance Reform Act. All right? So if you said anywhere in your ad, vote for, elect, defeat, support, vote against, reject, said the person's name, or cast your ballot for, that's an express ad. And any spending that you do on that counts towards your ceiling, towards your total that you could spend for a particular candidate. If you avoid those words, and if you simply just were talking about an issue, and you can get pretty close to the line. I'll have, there's a video that I will show you guys in a while, and it will show you how close they get to the line. There might be a photograph up there, but they're not saying vote for. They might really insinuate, about the other side, and, this is what this person wants to do, but they don't say vote for. As long as you are avoiding those words and have some sort of ability to spin it as an issue ad, something that's looking at a broader issue, no limits. You can run as many of these ads as you want, and you can buy up all the airtime you want. What we'll look at eventually, too, is the courts will begin to say, okay, since you are spending unlimited on these issue ads, does the public have a right to know who you are? That will be one of the next bumps, and you'll see that kind of fight play out. But, do we have a right to know who's behind these ads, or can they hide behind, certain titles, or not identify themselves at all? All right? So, I have some links. Let's look at this one. When you look at the money, the vast majority of it goes to incumbents when they're running their, whether it's an issue ad or whether it's in the form of soft money for a particular candidate. And again, the nice thing is if the laws can't make the spending transparent, there are certain, the irony is here's a watchdog group Here's an interest group that their job is to, watch other interest groups. And they'll put all the financial information out there. You can see who's given what to whom in the form of kind of PAC spending. Teachers are still somewhat of a powerful union. Conservative group, Democratic group. Their names are kind of, not always making it obvious as to who's who. And, if you were interested, you could break this down too, by candidate. There's other ways to kind of look at it, to trace the money. And again, that would be one of your tools when you do your own interest group. All right, so that's PAC spending on issue ads. The other thing that you could look at as a loophole is soft money. Now, soft money, anybody remember? What is soft money? See if that kind of rings a bell from last unit. Doesn't ring a bell. All right. So soft money is money that I give to the party for party building activities. And what they can do is use that money strategically to benefit a particular candidate. So again, what I've avoided is that direct line of money to a candidate. I found a way to indirectly benefit them, whether it's through an issue ad or through soft money. By contrast, hard money is where I give money to a party committee with the direct intention of use this money to run ads for and to give campaign support, whether it's money for hiring or money for any of the infrastructure that you might need to run a campaign. Okay, and that has ceilings and limits. Soft money, because it's independent, is considered a form of speech. No limits. Again, the rule of thumb is I've got to avoid direct advocacy. I've got to use it more in the generic. I've got to use it for party building activities. I think I have a link here again, but what's interesting is when you look at kind of some of the funding, one of the things that you guys are trying to unravel is, who votes how and why. Well, what you see here is that Republicans typically get money from the pharmaceutical, insurance, and energy companies, and the Democrats get money from unions and law firms. And again, it suggests, if we continue to pass legislation that favors them, you continue to get money, and they become a bit of a coalition. Similarly with Democrats, they become a coalition with the law firms and the unions. All right? So it used to be that that's all I had to do. And that was complex enough. Unfortunately, there's been 10 years beyond that of other efforts to reform, other court cases. And again, it keeps coming back to, look, we've made it transparent. Look, there's a loophole. So unfortunately, there's a long list that continues after this that you've just got to hold on to. And it starts with the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. Great name. You'll remember that, right? The BCRA. It's also known as the McCain-Feingold, so that ought to trip you up either. Maybe hopefully you know John McCain. You may not know Feingold. But it's got like two names and an acronym, and it's a little confusing in terms of what it does. So to kind of break it down slowly, the first thing it does is it, almost counterintuitively, raises the amount individuals can give. That seems strange. I thought I was trying to create a ceiling on what people can give to eliminate what the wealthy were able to do. Well, the wealthy have said, the heck with this system, I'm going to go spend it independently. And what happens is, like I said, that matching fund isn't keeping pace because you're giving these little increments into the matching funds. And then what candidates look at is, look, if I can get a PAC to spend on issue ads and to give me some soft money, why would I bother with this matching system? So what they were trying to do is make the matching system a little more robust by raising the ceilings. It was dubbed the Millionaires Amendment. Essentially what it was saying is candidates, there's people that are trying to run against wealthy individuals, and they're never going to stand a chance unless we make the matching fund system more viable. Okay? So that was step one. Step two was to try to introduce some restrictions on soft money donations. This is a loophole, And again, there's a distinction between hard money and soft money, but that distinction is really kind of blurred. And what they tried to do is make that distinction a little more obvious. It appeared that often parties were, how do I want to phrase this? Parties were suggesting to people, look, give me this money and this is how I'll use it. They were openly soliciting money and suggesting if you give me certain money, I can use it this way to advocate for this candidate, but still be within the letter of the law, right? So what they tried to do is to start trying to get rid of that open solicitation, that essentially advice as to how to work in the gray areas. What's most important, though, was the reform that happens with issue ads. What they said essentially is the identity of who's running the ads matters, and the public has a right to know when it's a big, powerful entity. So what they did is they specified if you are a corporate or labor PAC, and both give big money, and you run an ad that clearly identifies a candidate, it's an express ad, and it's aired within a certain time frame around an election, because what you'll notice is just prior to an election, the airwaves get saturated. Like there's a commercial every 20 seconds. If you meet these three criteria, you have to tell us who you are. So again, if you are a corporation or labor group and you are openly advocating for a particular candidate and you are within the window of when elections are imminent, you have to tell us who you are. Okay? That's the rule. Not that you can't run your issue ad because it's an issue ad. You just simply have to identify yourself. All right? Because you're a big, powerful entity and people have a right to know, was the idea. This, again, raises the issue of free speech. Do you have the right to say what you want and remain anonymous, essentially, is what we're going to debate here. And we have to kind of unravel it in McConnell versus FEC, another major court case. Look at all this. All right, this is where I start to pull my hair out. McConnell versus FEC said that soft money is something that we can regulate because soft money kind of falls out the area, outside the area of free speech. If I restrict soft money, I am not overtly restricting your rights to speech because soft money is being used for things like infrastructure to run a campaign, the hiring of individuals, perhaps, to staff a particular headquarters. Soft money is not about necessarily expressing specific political values and ideas. I'm using it to register voters. I'm using it for administrative costs. It's a hard sell to tell me that's speech, and therefore it's a hard sell to tell me that my restrictions on making sure that you don't openly try to solicit that money and use it for other purposes, that's not crossing the line. That's not restricting your speech. If I'm saying you can't openly solicit for this kind of money as a way of skirting the line, I'm not restricting your speech when I do that. So the court upholds the restrictions on soft money. When it looks at the issue ads, again, this is where I got the water analogy. The court itself says money's like water. It will find an outlet. We'll find kind of loopholes. And that's what allows us to take this more serious action. Whenever the court tries to make a decision, they weigh two countervailing interests. And what they try to say is, in the case of, let's say, freedom of speech versus public security and safety, which one do I have to value more in this case? So in this case, they basically felt like the issue of corruption was the more important issue. Money is going to find an outlet. Money has a tendency to corrupt. That potential corruption of the political process allows the court to take strong action, essentially. So, yes, we can put limits on issue ads. We can say you have to identify yourself, okay? Here's where the next maddening loophole comes, and you can see why we have to run through this a couple of times. There are things called 527 committees. 527 committees, and we'll look at 501, I think it's B committees, are taken from a line in the tax code. And what the tax code does is it essentially identifies different groups and qualifies some groups within the tax code as charitable institutions and therefore they don't have to pay taxes, or religious institutions and therefore they don't have to pay taxes. Within the tax code, we have different kind of classifications for groups that have financial kind of dealings. And what the 527 line says is that groups that are advocacy groups, public interest groups, basically don't have to follow the normal financial disclosure rules, all right? So what a bunch of interest groups began to do is to organize themselves as 527 groups. And it allowed them, using this tax code, as a way to escape oversight. Not limits necessarily, but oversight. They didn't have to disclose. If they were a PAC, they had to disclose. If they were 527, they don't have to disclose. This might be easier to kind of, I'm hoping my links still work. It's a dated kind of story on it, but I do want to watch now. It's a live stream. What I've got is a broadcast from.
They are the new attack dogs of American politics, so-called 527 committees that spend millions on advertising and other political activities with one goal in mind: to eviscerate the opposition. And according to President Bush, they make a mockery of campaign finance reform.
I thought we were going to, once and for all, get rid of a system where people could just pour tons of money in and not be held to account for the advertising.
But the president is well aware finance reform never covered 527s, which, because of a loophole in federal election law, can raise unlimited money as long as they don't coordinate with campaigns. What Mr. Bush may be more worried about, say finance experts, is the Republicans' inability to compete.
The 527s are much more active and much more successful on the Democratic side than the Republican side. So, all other things being equal, the president would benefit by a crackdown on the 527s.
In fact, of the top 20 527s, only 2 are Republican, and Democratic groups have outraised them 15 to 1.
For John Kerry, the 527s have been essential. They've put forward his message. They've attacked George Bush in ways that the Kerry campaign could not. And they've helped energize voters in a way that the Democratic Party could not.
And even as the president calls to eliminate 527s, Republicans are scrambling to catch up. Energized by the impact of the Swift Boat veterans' attack on John Kerry, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is backing a 527 group to attack John Edwards' connection to trial lawyers.
I think you're going to find the 527s are this year's major political innovation.
Now that so-called soft money, those huge unregulated corporate contributions, have been outlawed, 527 money is rushing in to fill the vacuum. More than $240 million at last count. And just like soft money, the candidates may complain about it, but neither side is about to be the first to give it up.
So I think that that's an important distinction too, is that a lot of this money is, supposedly running issue ads, but what you find out in politics is what works is going negative. It seems to work. It's effective. Then that doesn't necessarily mean, too, that you're not getting information. It does give you information, but it gives you information as to why not to like somebody or to support them, and it seems to sometimes sour the tenor of a political campaign. Hopefully that gives you a sense of what we're kind of talking about here. Unregulated money where you don't have to disclose because of a loophole in the tax code. At first the Democrats were more adept at exploiting that. But what they indicated is, conservative groups would begin to use it to run independent ads critical of Kerry, and in particular of his military kind of record in service of Vietnam. So what you see is a very classic example. If you had to have an example of a 527 ad, this is like one of the most classic examples. These Swift Boat veterans for truth, whom you don't quite know who they are beyond the ad.
They had personally raped, cut off ears, cut off heads.
The accusations that John Kerry made against devastating,
randomly shot at civilians,
and it hurt me more than any physical wounds I had.
cut off limbs, blown up bodies,
That was part of the torture, was to sign a statement that you had committed war crimes.
razed villages in fashion reminiscent of Genghis Khan.
John Kerry gave the enemy for free what I and many of my comrades in North Vietnam in the prison camps took torture to avoid saying. It demoralized us.
Crimes committed on a day-to-day basis
He betrayed us in the past. How could we be loyal to him now?
ravaged the countryside of South Vietnam.
He dishonored his country and, more importantly, the people he served with. He just sold them out.
Swift Boat Veterans for Truth is responsible for the content.
So you know that Swift Boat Veterans is running this ad, but like, you know, who are they? And where's their money coming from? Is a big kind of question. And this, you know, this did damage for Kerry. Kerry was a former.
Kerry, I watched with great interest some of your comments, and I say I think you're about to hit the trifecta. Geneva 2 is a total collapse, as I predicted to you.
Interesting. I don't know what that is. I'm going to watch that next. He was a former officer in the Vietnam War. He was decorated, but he came back. It's a divisive war. It was a difficult war, and he came back with all kinds of negative feelings. There's a moment where he throws his Medal of Honor away, and he testifies in front of Congress about the role that he felt the U.S. Army played in it, and some of the criminal things he felt that the U.S. Army was involved in. They're going to portray him as anti-patriotic that way. They're going to portray him as betraying fellow service members, and they're going to begin to use his war record as a way to look at him as a potential presidential candidate. So those ads did a lot of damage. Now, if that's where we were done, okay, maybe we can still struggle along. But what you see is next we've got Citizens United, and then Speech Now. And they both take a little bit of unraveling. So, again, the rule of what I'm going to try to do tomorrow is to put you guys into pairs and have you try to remember, starting with the Federal Campaign Elections Act, what the 4 restrictions were, what the 2 loopholes were, and then we'll just look at McCain-Feingold. And again, if you can remember kind of where they tried to restrict and where the loopholes opened up. So just peruse that again so that you can do that in a pair, and then we'll add the 2 other court cases. And you don't have to get it perfect this time because every year I have to kind of like reteach myself. This stuff does not stay in your head unless you really work at it. Okay? All right, have a good day.
Will Caroline LaFranca can come to Guidance?